Okay, you ready? Let's do it. You're listening to Chats from a Chair with me, Nick Dempsey, coming to you from my wheelchair. I speak with people who have a great story to tell, portraying the human potential, often in the face of adversity. Check out the Instagram page at chatsfromachair_podcast and let me know who you think I should have on and have a chat with. Also, don't forget to hit follow on whatever platform you're listening to this. But for now, sit back and enjoy this episode. Coming up in this episode, I speak with 2019 Joint Australian of the Year, Dr. Richard Harris, who you might know as the anaesthetist and cave diver that played a pivotal role in the rescue of the Thai soccer team that became trapped in a cave in 2018. I'll be speaking with him about how he came to be involved in the rescue efforts, the risks associated with sedating the young boys and diving them out through a narrow cave, the feelings he had when realising they had all survived, and how he views it all now, 5 years on. So stay tuned for all that and more. All right, Dr. Richard Harris, thanks so much for coming on and having a chat. How you going?
You're welcome, Nick. Good to be here.
Awesome, mate. Well, let's get into it. Obviously, we want to talk a lot about the Thai cave rescue and all that sort of things. But first off, just what was life like before the whole world knew who you were and you had people like me
Yeah,
messaging
well,
you to come on a podcast?
it was just normal, you know. I was just carrying on with life, working pretty hard as a doctor, both as an anaesthetist and working with the South Australian Ambulance in the aeromedical retrieval space, which basically is flying around the state picking up critical care patients from different locations. And then spending as much time as I could with my number one passion in life, which was cave diving, which I've been doing for a very long time. So, yeah, that was my life, and this thing kind of well, it didn't completely come out of the blue, I guess, because I was training and developing a capability in Australia and New Zealand for cave rescue, which might involve a flooded cave. So I had been thinking about this sort of situation for many years, and to be honest, hoping that we would get a chance to put this experience to use. So for me, this was a bit of a godsend in a way, you know, that I was finally going to get a chance to put all this training to work. But I would have liked something on a slightly smaller scale for my
Yeah,
first go, I guess.
something to ease into it a bit better.
Yeah.
Yeah. And back to the cave diving. I'm sure you get this question a lot, but why? Why cave dive for fun?
Yeah, I get that. It doesn't seem particularly appealing on the surface, but you know, when you start cave diving, I mean, you come from two different directions. You're either a caver who is going through a cave and you suddenly realize the passageway is blocked with water, so you're either going to call a cave diver or learn how to do it yourself if you want to keep exploring, or you're a diver like myself and you have an experience like I did down in the southeast of South Australia in the Mount Gambier area, where are these beautiful, crystal clear sinkholes and caves, and they're stunningly beautiful places. You know, the water is beyond clear; you can't even imagine it until you've been inside them. You know, it's like swimming through the air. So it's really an amazing experience, and the more you do it, you know, the more different stuff you see. And then you start to get into exploration like I did, which means you can actually find new caves and new tunnels, and it becomes quite addictive. So, you know, you don't start out groveling through really tight, muddy passages. You start out in great big open places, which are really easy and really beautiful. But, you know, as you become more involved in the sport, you start to venture further into the nooks and crannies of the caves and find out what's down there. So I understand why for most people it's their worst nightmare, but like anything, you know, that you do which might seem uncomfortable at first, you gradually build up experience and develop your abilities very slowly and carefully.
Yeah, of course. One thing I've always wondered about cave diving, how do you know that, like you said, you start to explore new passages? How do you know that's going to lead to somewhere you can get out?
Well, if you've come in, then in theory you should be able to get out again. But that is one of the ways to come unstuck if you squeeze yourself into something that is so tight that you can't turn around or reverse out. So you learn the hard way pretty early to be careful in those situations, and you do have a few frights early on while you're developing that experience and skill. But having good mentors to guide you in those places, and just taking your time and not pushing your limits too fast and too hard is very important. And I think having lots of small frights along the way before you have a big fright is very important in developing your skills to stay calm and survive in those environments. So it's really a mental game as much as anything. It's about being able to solve problems under a bit of pressure, and in a way, that's what I enjoy about it.
Yeah, okay, well, I'm gonna look, I'll leave that all to you. But that's no, no, that like you said, once you develop a skill in anything, I suppose, everything seems difficult until you start practicing and get better at it as you go. But um,
Yeah.
I want to get into the rescue, and for those that don't know, it was in June 2018 when a young Thai soccer team of 12 boys and their coach went exploring a cave when a monsoon hit and the cave flooded, trapping the boys in the cave and began a search before finding them alive. So, did you see all this on the news before you were contacted regarding it, or what was your experience with that?
Yeah, I live in Adelaide, and the local paper had something, just a very small article on about page 3 about some boys being missing in a cave in Thailand on about their second day in. And with my interest in cave diving and cave rescue, and actually I'd been to Thailand on some previous cave diving expeditions, so I knew some of the people there. So I reached out to one of the guys, Ben Raymonitz, who's a Belgian expat in Thailand, who I thought might be involved or have some more information, and he was actually on his way up to the cave at that time when I spoke to him. So I was chatting to him over the next few days, and it all sounded pretty desperate. The monsoon rains had come early. The boys had obviously gone into this cave, and now the cave was flooding, and people were able to go in about 800, oh, no more than that, about 1.6 kilometers into the cave, and they realized that's where the cave was filling up with water, and the kids were obviously on the wrong side of that water somewhere beyond. And the cave's got about 10 kilometers of passageway. So they could have been anywhere, and they could already be dead for it, for what anyone knew. So, I started offering my services, saying, if you need cave divers to come and help search for them, then I'd be happy to come over. But it wasn't until the British divers went over there and actually found the kids that, and again, I knew those guys from previous expeditions. It's a pretty small community, I think, globally. Again, maybe not surprisingly, but
Yeah.
when I heard that those guys had found the kids, then that's when I really got involved, talking to them and maybe coming up with a plan of how to get the kids out.
Right, so originally you just said, look, I'm a cave diver, happy to help with that. You had no idea of having to put your anaesthetist skills to work at that stage.
No, not at all. I was definitely offering my services just as an experienced cave diver with an interest in cave rescue, and being a doctor, I thought, well, if these kids are found or if they're alive, then maybe those skills could be useful as well. But no, anesthesia never entered my mind, was never part of the equation in my view, until this guy Rick Stanton, the British diver, one of the two guys who helped find the kids, um, actually said to me, "What do you think about sedating these children to bring them out?" Because they could see no other possible way that they were going to come out alive. And my response to that was just pretty immediate. It was just like, "No way, that is impossible."
Then he just stuck at it.
Yeah, he's a persistent bugger, and I when I left Australia for Thailand, after that conversation, the Australian government rang me up and said, we've been speaking to some Australian people on the ground, and this idea of bringing you over to help with the rescue has come from the British divers. What do you think? And when I left Australia and with my mate Craig Challen, the other cave diver that I do a lot of this sort of stuff with, my idea was that that's the last thing I'm going to be doing. It's going to be something else, to help these guys.
So even when you were heading over there, you still didn't think that was going to be what you were doing.
Well, I knew it was on the cards, but I didn't. I truly believe 100% that there's no possible way that that could succeed, and it would result in the deaths of all the kids if we did try that. But obviously, on the back of an envelope, I was starting to make a few notes and start a few thoughts about if it came to that, how would I approach it? What would I do? So
Yep.
yeah, so I was giving it some thought, but it was absolutely the last thing at the bottom of the list that I wanted to try.
Did you have conversations with your family and friends back home around that and try to, get their ideas, get your head around it? Or,
Yeah, I mean, my wife, obviously, first and foremost, she as soon as she heard about this rescue, people were starting to ask her, is Harry going to Thailand? Because they knew this is the sort of stuff I was involved with, and so obviously I was talking to her about all these options, and she's got a medical background as well, so she kind of understood some of the implications of what they were suggesting. I did phone a couple of friends as well, kind of respected medical people with very practical outdoors rescue, other kind of experiences that I thought might be of help to me. And, to be honest, those guys didn't have any more ideas than I did, and they were equally probably pessimistic about the likely outcome. But I thought I'd better check in with a few other people just to, make sure the plan that I was toying with was the best, terrible plan there was. So yeah, they didn't have any. They didn't have much to offer.
yeah, that's massive help for you. Massive help. Um, but no, that's great. So you make the decision, right? Going to head over to Thailand. When you land on the ground and you arrive at the cave, can you try to convey those scenes to us? What was going on?
I mean, it was chaos. Was the first impression. There were just people everywhere. It was just getting dark when I first arrived at the cave. The media throng was, all as soon as I opened the door of this van to get out, there was just a sea of media pointing lights and microphones and cameras at me. I'd never seen anything like it, and I'd never had any experience really with the media in my life. So, that was completely terrifying. That was the scariest thing of the whole experience. So I managed to, wade past them and asked to be shown to where the British divers were camped, and got in touch with them. Just start to, make some sense of this whole thing. But there were thousands of people around by the time I got there, and it was pissing with rain. People were walking around in mud up to their knees, and it was pretty ordinary. And making sense of the place because all these people wearing different uniforms, different nationalities. It was huge, really huge thing to be involved with.
Yeah, it was a real whole world effort, really, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Everyone got involved. And then so you're taken back to the camp with the other divers, and what are those conversations like initially? Is it sort of panic or desperation between all of you? Are you trying to keep calm and measured in your approach?
Yeah, there was definitely no sense of panic. It sounds brutal, but it wasn't our lives in danger. So we were just trying to work through the problems and see if there's anything we could contribute. And cave divers are pretty practical, pragmatic sort of people, and they've taken some risks, so they're used to dealing with dangerous situations, I guess. So it was a matter of first of all getting what I could from the British divers about where they were up to, what they'd been doing, what was the situation with the kids, what kind of condition were they in, and what plans were in place, what things had been tried, what things were clearly going to fail. Um, and then to talk to the Brits about this idea about the sedation or anesthesia. What were they actually thinking? Did they understand what they were asking for? Which I don't know if they completely did, but they certainly didn't understand the possible risks, I think, like I did. So, I was always the most pessimistic, but I felt like that was because I actually understood all the things that could go wrong. It sounds simple maybe at the outset to say, well, just give this kid some drugs and they'll be a bit sleepy and they won't panic, so that'll help us take them out of the cave. But obviously, it's not quite as simple as that. Uh,
Yeah, sometimes that ignorance can be bliss to help with a situation like that. But like you said, if you're the one, know the calculated risk of what there is, it can sometimes put more thoughts in your head.
well, sure, and maybe a little knowledge is dangerous on their part, but on the other hand, I was probably overthinking it as it turned out. But not without some significant theoretical and practical experience around this to be genuinely worried. I mean, we had been training in cave rescue through sumps through a flooded section of the cave for many years. And I remember on one occasion, I actually pretended to be unconscious myself and using a full face mask, which seals all the way around your face, because obviously you can't hold a mouthpiece in your mouth if you're going to be unconscious. Even using one of those masks, I got these guys to sort of drag me around underwater in a cave, and slowly but surely the mask would fill up with water unless I took active steps to clear it, which obviously I had plenty of incentive to do. But a genuinely unconscious person wouldn't be able to do that. So I was convinced they would drown inside the mask just from a little bit of water getting inside.
Yeah, right. So, like you said, obviously that extra knowledge makes that extra little bit terrifying. But
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, that's definitely a scary situation. But the diving in the cave itself, if you take away the fact you had to rescue these kids, would that be a more dangerous dive for an experienced cave diver, or is that not too bad, I suppose?
Yeah, I mean, relatively so, because the cave was actively flooding, and we wouldn't normally dive in a cave that was, transitioning from dry to flood. That is a potentially dangerous situation. But the water levels had stabilised by the time I got there. Rick and John, the Navy SEALs, and some of these other guys like Ben had experienced the cave in full flood, and it was a very, very dangerous place to be diving. But it had all settled down a bit by the time I got there, so I wasn't particularly concerned about my own safety in the cave. Although you've always got one eye on the water levels, because we were concerned that a flood pulse could come through the cave again if the monsoons kicked up. Um, and one of the problems was that the meteorologists told us that it was only 3 to 5 days before they expected the rains to come back. And when that happened, they expected all the pumps and things to be overwhelmed and for the cave to return to that very dangerous state. So, that was in the back of our minds. But, you take each day as it comes, and the conditions in the cave were acceptable, put it that way. And as I say, I never felt like, I was going to die because of the cave diving. And that's a hard thing for other people to understand without that experience. They think we were brave or heroic to just go in that cave, and this is the sort of stuff we do on the weekends for fun. So, that side of things wasn't the issue for me. It was always this, worry about the kids. What's the best thing to do for them?
Because I think even was it an ex-Navy SEAL that wasn't an experienced diver passed away during the rescue mission?
Yeah, actually, as Craig and I flew into Thailand, he drowned in the cave at about 1:30 in the morning, trying to take some wetsuits through to where the boys were. And this is the big problem with very experienced divers from either the military or police or diving instructors, assuming that those skills will be transferable into cave diving. And it's a very, very unique environment, and you do need very specific training and equipment and experience to be able to safely dive in caves, no matter what your other diving experience is. And you can't question the courage and fitness of these and experience of these Thai Navy SEALs. I mean, they're an elite diving combat force. They are literally the best of the best. So, but they just didn't have those specific skills. So, we were always worried about them being in the cave.
Yeah, of course. Like you said, it's incredible bravery. It was a whole world effort, and them just trying to do what they can to help. It's unfortunate something like that was to happen, but
Yeah.
um, yeah. So what conversations going on around camp between yourself, other divers? What was it that got you to that stage where you said, "Okay, yep, let's sedate the kids and let's give this a crack"?
Yeah, well, I guess I had about 24 hours on the ground to make that decision before we went ahead with the rescue attempt. And in that time, it was enough to learn enough about what was going on, the water pumping operations, the search for other entrances, the idea that maybe we could just take enough food in there for the kids to survive the monsoon season and just leave them in there. And one by one, all those other ideas fell away as I realised that they were all impossible. So just to sort of talk about a couple of those things, the obvious thing was, well, can't we just teach the kids how to dive and just take them out? And people who suggest that's possible don't understand the difficulties of diving in a cave through very tight restrictions, literally zero visibility in the water. It's just like swimming through mud, or coffee. You can't see your hand in front of your face. And, to ask a child who we were told actually couldn't even swim at that stage, that turned out not to be the case, but that's the information we were working on. To expect a child to be able to do that for 3 hours all the way out without panicking is impossible. And, we knew from our own experiences as when we were young, inexperienced cave divers, how impossible that would have been for us at that stage. So that was ruled out very early, and there wasn't time to teach them. And then I thought, well, maybe just a little bit of sedation just to take the edge off, but it's not quite that precise a science. So you can't, how do you give someone enough to make them feel relaxed but not impaired, or that's just not a thing. So it really came down to they have to be wide awake or they have to be fully unconscious, like surgically anaesthetised. And, that brings in a whole raft of other potential dangers and hazards. Normally that happens in a well-lit operating theatre, temperature controlled, lots of monitoring, expert assistance, gleaming, shiny equipment everywhere, the machine that goes bing. And, we'd basically be anaesthetising these boys and taking them underwater without being able to see them at all, and just to be able to feel and hear them. And, that's something I guess I could contemplate, but how do you ask someone with no critical care medical skills to do that? And that's what these other divers were. They were dive instructors or rope access workers or IT guys. They're not doctors or nurses or paramedics. So, it's a big ask.
Yeah, hearing you just explain it like that makes it all the more incredible that it actually worked, that it
Well,
actually.
no one was more surprised than me.
Yeah, yeah, I could imagine. Um, yeah, to getting them to as well top up the anesthesia. That's how hard was that?
Yeah, I mean, it only kind of dawned on me after I'd agreed to do this almost that, these guys were going to have to be the anaesthetists, because I couldn't take each kid out myself and look after them. That would mean we'd only get 1 or 2 kids out per day. We had 13 to do, and so we had to get at least 4 out a day. And given, that we were told we've got 3 days to do this with the weather forecast. So, we had to get the other guys to do the anaesthetics. Each dose of the ketamine, which was the drug that I was injecting into their thigh muscle, was probably going to last about half to 3/4 of an hour. And they had a 3-hour journey, so they were going to need multiple top-ups. So I remember giving this anaesthetics lecture to the group of divers. It took about 20 minutes for them to learn what took me 6 years after medical school. And then, I'm still amazed at the courage and pragmatism again of these divers, that they agreed to do this, because, I was scared. I can't imagine how frightening that request was, or that challenge was for those guys, and they did an amazing job.
Like I said, it might have been a little bit of the help them not knowing the risks as much as yourself. They might have been able to sit back and be a little bit more relaxed at administering that, not knowing fully what they were doing to an extent, I imagine. But yeah, that still would have been an incredible feat, and incredibly brave of them, like you said. But so, what were some of the risks that could have gone wrong with the kids giving that anesthesia and trying to dive them out?
There were 3 main things that I was worried about. The first one I've mentioned, which was the water getting inside the mask. The second thing I was worried about was just losing their airway. If your head falls forward, or you get some saliva or water on your larynx, that can cause the larynx to clamp shut, especially in young people. And even if those 2 things didn't kill the kids, I was very worried about their temperature. Anesthesia traditionally makes your core temperature fall very easily. And, these kids were going to be in 23-degree water, which, saps the heat away from you very quickly. Their wetsuits were pretty poor fitting. So I thought that even if those airway problems don't occur, there's no possible way that after 3 hours in the water they're going to be alive because of their hypothermia. And, in retrospect, I can explain how they survived all those 3 main problems. But, I guess I can put it all together now, but I certainly didn't have that information, when we went into it.
Yeah, of course, that was incredible risky. And you were approached by someone that said they can't promise that you wouldn't be end up in the judicial system because of this. Is that right?
Yeah, that's true. On the first morning of the rescue, one of the guys from the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade came up to me and said that we've just sort of realised that there is a very small risk that if these kids die, that you and Craig, because Craig's a vet, so he's kind of the other medical person in the frame, that it's possible you guys could get caught up in the Thai judicial system. And I sort of had to think through those words. What does that exactly mean for me? But to be honest, in that moment, firstly, I didn't have the bandwidth to even think about that. I was literally walking into the cave. And these guys had to tell us if that risk had become apparent to them through whatever means. But I couldn't even think about it at that moment that I was, my brain was so full of the challenges of this rescue. And also, I think deep down, I'm over there as a volunteer, a good Samaritan. I'm trying to help these kids. And I couldn't probably really believe that someone could turn around and blame us for what I felt was an inevitable outcome. I truly thought we were going to be essentially euthanizing these kids. So, maybe I'm naive or, my natural tendency to believe the best in people meant that I just didn't think that was a thing. Now, it probably was naive because, the Thai government is fairly tough and it's a military junta, so there's kind of a military chain of command, and maybe they would have been looking for a scapegoat because bad decision making in that system is probably not well rewarded, and people might have been running for cover and trying to pin it on one of the foreigners, but look, who knows? Fortunately, we'll never be tested. The Thai people are amazing. They're very kind and gentle people. I'd like to believe that wasn't going to be a problem.
Yeah, an element of just surely not, I guess. And then
Yeah.
that I imagine would have helped you massively in the moment if you had that on your mind where you thought that was a real possibility. Just would have thrown an extra thing in there that you've obviously already trying to accomplish this ridiculous, seems impossible feat. So throwing that in there, it was probably good that you were able to just shut it out, put it to the back of your mind, and get to the work, and get the job done.
Yeah, I mean, what was I going to do? Was I going to suddenly say, "Oh, no, not doing it"? I mean,
Turn around
I'd
and go.
already met these kids. I'd met these kids and the coach and there were 4 Thai Navy SEALs in there as well, trapped with the kids by this stage. Looking after the kids.
Mm.
So what are you going to do? You're going to turn your back on those 17 people and just walk away? It just doesn't happen.
So when you went in and you met those kids, what was that feeling like for the first time when you saw them? Obviously, you'd been speaking about them and other people had seen them, but what was different when you went in and you saw the kids there?
Yeah, I think that's when it all changed in my mind. This went from a hypothetical adventure to a bloody hell, these are real people and amazing people as well. Beautiful kids and incredibly courageous and resilient. There was no crying, there was no sooking. They were all just like teenage boys, on a camp or something. They were, having a bit of a arguing and a few, fun punches on each other and stuff. Just like you'd expect boys to be behaving on a camp or something.
Yeah,
I
like
was
it's
going,
schoolyard or
do
something.
these guys realize what? And of course they did. They're not stupid. But what does that say about those boys? I mean, they're amazing, really impressive. But that changed everything in my mind. There's no way I'm getting on a plane to go home without doing something for those boys once I've met them.
Yeah, of course. It gives you that extra push you need. But once so you're heading towards the cave, ready to do the first dive and extraction. What happens? Do you try to talk us through that moment?
Yeah, well, when I had dived into the cave with Craig the day before, we'd met the kids, the coach, and the Navy SEALs, one of whom spoke quite good English. So I was able, through that Navy SEAL, to explain to the kids what was going to happen the next day if we came back with this anaesthetic plan. So they were kind of prepared for what was in store. So when we came back the next day, we had 4 of the kids dressed in their wetsuits, and one by one they came down this muddy slope and sat on my lap in the water, and I gave them the ketamine injection and waited for them to fall asleep, and then myself and one of the British divers would put the full face mask on their face. We strapped a cylinder of oxygen to their chest to kind of like a keel to make them float horizontally face down and be easier to push through the water. And then we'd also decided to tie their hands behind their backs and tie their ankles together, just to make them as streamlined as possible to push through the cave so that they wouldn't get tangled up and hooked up on any projections, especially through the really tight parts of the cave. And the other reason for that was to, if they did suddenly wake up underwater, inevitably when they would panic, that they wouldn't be able to reach up and rip their mask off, and it would give us time to re-anaesthetise them. And, there are a couple of things that I'll never forget. And the first one is that moment when you push a child's face, into the water, even with that mask on. That felt so wrong on many levels, as you can imagine. And the second thing was doing that restraint, tying their hands behind their backs when they're unconscious. That's just something that humans should never do to each other. And, that moment kind of wasn't lost on me. It felt pretty bad. But equally, it's amazing how you can get used to that sort of thing. And over the next 3 days, and those 13 young people, I'll never say it became comfortable, but we certainly got more efficient at it. Their progress through the cave with the British divers, the ones who were taking the boys through, all got efficient and safer. And, as you know, it all ended up working out.
Yeah, of course. And like you said, you thought to an extent you were euthanizing these kids. So I imagine that feeling, like you said, pushing their face under and restraining them, that you thought this could be the end, but we have to give it a go. And yeah, I mean, incredibly brave to take that risk. And yeah, it all worked out in the end because of that.
Yeah, I mean, it didn't feel brave. It just felt like there is no other option here, because the other option is basically to leave them in there and let them die over several weeks, I presume, from starvation or infection. The oxygen levels in that chamber were falling, so that was another thing that made us have to get on with something. And again, not just the kids, but the Navy SEALs. There's no way those Navy SEALs were going to leave those kids by themselves to die. They would have stayed with them and perished alongside them, I'm sure. So, there's 17 lives at stake, and I think the thing that gave me the courage to do this, even though I felt like it was going to end in disaster, was that firstly we'd be returning those kids to their parents, rather than having those parents have to wait for 6 months to get their skeletal remains back out of the cave. And, if they were going to die, then dying whilst you're anaesthetised, dying whilst you're asleep is surely better than dying of starvation, let alone the psychological horror of what those kids would have been exposed to had they realised the next day that we just weren't coming back to get them. So it actually seemed like an easy decision for me, which is maybe it's hard to understand, but when you just got those two choices, what are you going to do?
So once that first group was out and you were able to come out and see that they all made it through, what was that feeling like?
Yeah, well, of course, I didn't know if any of the kids had survived that first day until I got out late in the day, because, the kids would disappear down the cave with the British cave divers, and I swam out alone with my thoughts at the end of the day, and, was greeted in Chamber 3, which was the last sort of part of the diving area, by one of the US Air Force guys, and he said to me, 4 out of 4, Doc. And I was so convinced that I was going to be told that they're all dead that I assumed he meant, 4 of them had perished. So he must have seen the look on my face and went, "No, mate, they're all good. They're fine." And there was this huge sense of relief, and then suddenly, I have to say, a really strong feeling of fear, because I realised, oh my God, we've got to do this again tomorrow and the next day, And more than that, now that we'd had a success, I just had this dread that, when inevitably it all went pear-shaped the next day, that, not only, would the kids have died, but suddenly people were going to be saying, well, you guys must have done something wrong, because yesterday it worked and now it hasn't. So, what's going on? So that night for me was probably the worst night of the whole experience in Thailand. I was really nervous about what was going to happen the next day. And, lying in my hotel room, listening to the rain on the roof, I also thought, well, if the rain's come early now, we might not even get back in the cave the next day, and those kids are still stuck in there. So it was a bit of a sleepless night. But at the end of the second day, I started to sense that actually this could work. It started to turn around.
Yeah, right. So there wasn't a feeling of, okay, we did the first day, we got this now. It was it was never that sort of confidence. You were still very much like,
Yeah,
oh
definitely.
shit.
It's more like, how did we get away with that?
Yeah.
Tomorrow this is going to all come unstuck, and I'm going to be exposed to be the fraud that I felt like I was. This is just not possible that this is working.
And of course, then you bring the families into it as well, and you think, well, if these four people have been returned to their families, I imagine there's almost a sense of if they all were to stay in there and they all die together, it's all the families are together, they all had the same experience. You can kind of put it in all that same sort of bracket, I
Yeah,
guess. But if some make it out and some don't, then it separates the two, and yeah, it makes it that much harder.
it's interesting. As far as I know, nobody was told which kids were out, even the parents, until all the kids were out.
Oh right.
And that must have been agonizing for those parents. I'm not 100% sure if that's the case, but that's what we were told at the time. And certainly in the media, and no one else was told, which children had come out successfully. So, man, I just can't imagine those parents waiting. Is my boy out? A 30% chance that my kid's alive now.
Yeah, from not knowing whether they're even going to make it out, you're waiting, and then have the relief of, oh, there is something happening, and then yeah, like you said, that added extra waiting again could have
Yeah,
been, would have been horrible.
there there were some interesting moral dilemmas around all this. For example, I never spoke to those parents, and I was never asked to speak to the parents. I kind of expected that I would have to. But what would I have said to them, and how could I have asked them to help make that decision? Knowing on the one hand, I'd be saying if we don't do this, they will die. But if we do this, and I would have had to be honest, I would have had to say, look, I don't think they can survive if we do it either. I mean, how can you ask a parent to make that decision? And what if half the parents had said, give it a go, and half the parents had said, well, where there's life, there's hope, so don't do anything that's going to certainly kill them? What do you do with that? So in a way, I wonder whether something like this couldn't have worked in Australia or another country like ours, because we would have had to talk to those parents, given them all the information, and then we would be at this impasse where half might say yes, half might say no. I can't go in and just get half the kids out.
Yeah, everything just kind of lined up in the right way, didn't it?
Yeah,
With where it was, who was there, it was yeah, amazing. Keep going back to it, but it's ridiculous thinking about it, isn't it? Absolutely ridiculous that it all
it is
worked.
crazy.
Um,
What the hell was I thinking?
yeah. um, so did you actually dive the kids out yourself, or did you sedate them and then other people dive them out?
So my job was to anaesthetise them and then hand them off to one of the British divers, one of the four Brits, and then we had all the other divers like Craig and others stationed along the way to assist them as they went past. So the cave was divided into fully submerged sumps where you had to be diving, and then between those sumps it's like a river, underground river, I guess, and that's where we put the other divers to stand and wait in the water to help as they went past. And we tried to do the anaesthetic top ups as they went through those sections. So, for example, that was one of Craig's main jobs. Being a vet, he was able to help the divers with their anaesthetic injections and give them the confidence to do the next one down the line when they wouldn't be with someone like Craig. Having said that, I did end up taking the last boy out because one of the British divers lost the line, the rope that we were using to navigate by. Because remember, you can't see anything, so you've just got to keep one hand on that rope the whole time. And of course, when you've got a boy under your arm on the other side and one hand on the rope, there are some difficult parts of the cave to pass through where it's very hard to keep a hand on both those things. And he lost the line and got completely turned around underwater, got lost for a good 5 minutes or so, which is a long time to be lost underwater without being able to see, especially when you've got a little unconscious boy under your arm. And he ended up coming backwards back into the cave, and that's where I found him. And he was pretty shook up. It wasn't, he was in control still, but he'd had a real fright. So I offered to take the boy out from that point for him, and I kind of wish I didn't, because I had exactly the same experience. I got lost off the line in exactly the same place. And I think something might have changed with the rope at that point. It might have got pulled tighter or something, but it just seemed impossible to hang on to it and get through this little restriction. But fortunately, given the information that he was able to give me about his experience, I was able to use that and stay orientated and keep moving in the right direction until I relocated the rope further on. So, yeah, I was lucky, but it was it was a bit scary.
So you hand the last boy over on the last day, and you got to experience that actually diving out that last section and handing him over. How was that different to the rest of it? How did that feel?
Well, yeah, I mean that moment when I realised the last boy's been brought out and everyone's alive at that point. I still didn't know what had happened to the other four people on the last day until I knew they'd gotten out alive, but they were still on their way to hospital presumably. But there was a massive sense of relief, it's fair to say, and I think we were so exhausted. The last 4 days we've been running on a few hours sleep a night, and this very significant mental pressure of what we're doing. And so we kind of all stood around in this chamber 3, staring at each other with these dumb smiles on our face, and not really kind of sure what to do next. There'd been such pressure, and we didn't really know how to react to it all. So someone pulled out a bottle of Jack Daniels actually, and we just had a little nip from these little, those little paper pill cups that you get in hospital, and that was an amazing moment. Just sort of smiling with this group of people that we'd shared this incredible experience with, and so we all headed out of the cave, and that was the moment that I realised, I think, the significance of what had happened, because there was this double line of people making a corridor for us to walk through, and they were all just clapping and cheering for every single person who came out of the cave. And everyone was slapping us on the back and shaking us hand. And I remember actually waking up the next day going, geez, my hand's sore. What have I done to it? And I remembered that I must have shaken hands with about 1,000 people, on the way out. You get to the end of this corridor, and then you join the end of that queue and slap the next people on the back and shake their hand as they were coming out, and everyone's applauding. I thought there'd be a massive celebration that night, but we were just knackered, so we all slunk off to our hotels to bed. But after that, we were able to have some pretty good parties on the ties. They looked after us very well.
I mean, that's such an amazing feat. I think that's the least you deserve is to pass around a couple drinks. But I know that you went from such a high of getting the kids out, and then you came out of the cave and got some pretty terrible news from back home. Can you tell us a little bit about that? And then also, 5 years on now, how you look back on all those moments and the rescue itself?
That night, I went back to my motel, and I rang my wife, as I've been doing every night, to make sure that she knew I was safe. And of course, I'm full of excitement about the success we'd achieved. And so I was probably, full of adrenaline and babbling to her, and I told her, about the great success, and she sort of let me run with it. And then after about 10 minutes of that, I sort of drew a breath, and she suddenly burst into tears and told me that my father had just died that afternoon, probably about the same time as the last kid came out of the cave. And I remember having these two kind of extremes of emotion, the joy of what we'd just achieved, and the fact that all these kids and those Navy SEALs had finally come out of the cave alive after 2 weeks, and the sudden sadness about losing my father, who was a very close friend and someone I really aspired to be like. And I was all over the place. I didn't know what to do, and everyone assumed the next day when I told them about my father that I'd want to go home to Adelaide that day. But I suddenly realised that actually in that moment, this was a double cause for celebration in a way. My dad was 88. He had cancer. The end for him actually was not looking that great, and he just popped his clogs. He just dropped dead. And he, like myself, pretty practical guy. He always felt that quality of life was far more important than quantity. And he was an incredibly positive person who I, as I say, aspired to be like. And I realised that to be sad about his death was kind of selfish in a way, because he had this amazing life and he had died a really good death, which, having been a medical person and seen lots of suffering and death, I feel like that's, a natural part of us being here. We're all going to die, and to have a good death is the best thing you can ever hope for someone that you love. And so I just decided to stay in Thailand and celebrate both these amazing things, my dad's life and the survival of these children, and also, our involvement in this amazing story, to be part of this huge global effort to save the lives of some children. Who gets to do that? I mean, it was fantastic. And so we stayed on in Thailand and celebrated pretty hard with the Thais. They looked after us very well. And that kind of was the moment my life changed, I think. I got back to Australia thinking, well, that was cool. Back to work on Monday, sort of thing. And suddenly realised that we were the focus of enormous attention. And I probably hadn't realised the size of this story globally. It was a big thing, and we didn't know that because we were underground and out of sight, out of mind, really. So, 5 years on, how do I feel about the whole thing? I still feel just as proud as I did that day. I think that I was part of this incredible story. And this has also given me amazing opportunities. I've actually just recently retired from medicine. I'm pursuing this lifelong dream I've had to do documentary filmmaking, which is, after 5 years of pretty hard work, is suddenly starting to come together and looks like might see some reward for my endeavours. And we continue to train and do cave rescue training. And if I was offered the opportunity to do the same thing again or be involved in some humanitarian event like that, I would absolutely jump at the chance to be part of it. For me, there was no downside. It was all a really thoroughly rewarding and positive part of my life. Now, obviously, if even one of those kids had died, I probably wouldn't be here telling the story. I wouldn't feel the same way. But, what an amazing thing to be part of. So, yeah, happy days.
I mean, it doesn't seem fair after such an incredible feat you accomplished, something so selfless, to find out that kind of news. Just, yeah, it doesn't seem fair. But I mean, the way you're able to process it, and it's good that you were treated to some drinks by the Tyres. So, yeah, to celebrate that life, that's an amazing outlook to have on it, and be able to turn that into a positive. And I'm sure those last few days would have been pretty amazing, and being over in Thailand now that it was all a success. So, no, that's amazing, mate. I know you need to get going, so I'll let you go. Thanks so much for coming on and sharing your story. I'm sure people, even if I've heard it before, again, hearing it from your mouth is it's quite amazing. So I'm sure you hear this a lot, but you should be very proud. So no, thanks a lot for coming on, mate. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Nick. It's been great to meet you.
Wow, well, what a story, Dr. Richard Harris there. I don't know how I'm going to put into words and sum up that sort of story, but quite amazing. Obviously, you can hear it, even with such an incredible feat, still so humble about the whole thing, and happy to bring others in and say what a wonderful job they did, which is obviously true. But yeah, you can't downplay the role that he played. So the bravery of everyone involved contributed to those boys being saved the way they were. And yeah, just an amazing story to actually speak to him and hear from his perspective different things that went on behind the scenes. It was a great chat. I'm sure. Hope you all enjoyed that, but as much as I did. Great man to speak to. But if you want to hear more from Richard, you can check out his podcast called Real Risk, where he speaks to other people that are seen to be risk takers, as he's seen to be with cave diving. He speaks to other people that do similar sort of extreme activities, and he's also got a book, The Art of Risk. So check both of them out if you're interested. I'll tag him on all the posts on the Instagram page, so that's a quick, easy way to find him. If you check out the Chats from a Chair _ podcast page, he'll be on there. But if this episode did bring up any adverse feelings for you, you can reach out to Lifeline on 13 11 14. Please seek their services if needed. Remember to check in on each other, and that it ain't weak to speak. But that's it for this episode. Keep an eye out on the Instagram page and subscribe here to be notified when the next guest is coming on. Cheers.